Father, we just thank you for a great day, an opportunity to be here, to just have a chance to know and hear from you. And we just ask for your presence in this room today. For the students, as they have distractions and other things, that those would be not bothersome or worrisome, but instead they would find just a peace of heart today and a peace of mind as we understand and learn more about who you are and what you've done. And so we give this time to you now in Jesus' name. Amen. What I'd like to do is just to wrap up even our talk about questions that occur from about a scientific method as well. By the way, have any visitors today from other places and locations? Oh, good. All right. We're here where you're from, and then I'll tell you a little bit about, well, let's hear. Raise your hand where you're from or visiting. Awesome. Well, listen, this is psychology. If you're here visiting today, and we're going to talk about the brain. We're going to talk a little bit about neurotransmitters. You can stay, by the way, as guests as long as you want. And it doesn't bug me if you have to get up and leave either. All right? So no problem with doing that as well. We're going to, however, use something called clickers real quick, and I want to give you a quick survey to show you a little bit about how surveys work, and also to get a sense of some things, and just show you it's 20 questions. They'll be pretty quick, and we'll talk some later on about this, which is the idea of how anxiety comes in. And so this is a little bit related to that. So here we go. Take out your clickers, and for everybody else, you can see what the answer is. If you don't have a clicker, not a problem. You can go along and just vote by just following along. So here we go. First question. This is the directions. A number of statements which people have used to describe themselves will appear. Read each statement and then click the appropriate letter, A, B, C, or D, that indicates how in general you feel. Make sense? All right, question 1. And it goes like this. I feel pleasant. A, almost never. B, sometimes. C, often. And D, almost always. Okay? Vote quick. And we'll go through it. And you'll see where everybody else lands on this. First question, I feel pleasant. Generally, how you oftentimes feel generally. Got it? We'll see if we get to 100 and I don't know what. See how many are here. Everybody voted? All right, we'll go to 130 from now on. All right, and you can see here that many of you are in the often or almost always. Some are in the almost never and sometimes. All right, here we go. Next one. Ready? I feel nervous and restless. Almost never, sometimes, often, almost always. When we do surveys like this in courses or in research projects, sometimes it's just broad statements. And yet it does give us some very interesting insights. In this case, I'll tell you what it means, and we'll talk. Oh, we'll hit 130. Perfect. 132 this time even. You can see numbers there. Feeling nervous and restless, almost never. Sometimes wins out. All right, I feel satisfied with myself. And again, generally. For those that are visiting, these are clickers that the students have that we can vote and do all kinds of things with. It's anonymous and confidential, but it gets read real quick into my computer. Some of you have used these. How many guests are using these in there where you're from? Any guests using them? Oh, yeah, good. Where are you guys, did you say? San Diego, yeah. All right. That was a good vote there. All right, ready? Next question. I wish I could be as happy as others seem to be. By the way, we're going to talk about pleasure, and we've been talking some about pleasure. What neurotransmitter, for the class that's been here, what neurotransmitter have we talked about that is implicated when we find pleasure? On almost all cases, we find dopamine is one of those neurotransmitters. We'll talk about OxyContin and others, but in particular, dopamine systems seem to be engaged in the idea of pleasure. Wow, we got a little bit more in there. Good. Number 5, I feel like a failure. Almost never, sometimes, often, almost always. Be thinking if you have any other questions too as we get ready to transition out of this chapter to the next one. See if you have questions as well. Write them down so you don't forget to ask. And you can see numbers. Number 6, I feel rested. How you generally feel. All right, y'all answered very quickly on this, and the answer is 9 of you are doing very well. I am calm, cool, and collected. Almost never, sometimes, often, almost always. Come on, 130. Oh, you did it. Way to go. Number 8. Ready? I feel that difficulties are piling up so they cannot overcome them. I'll share, by the way, national numbers on this. I'm going to wait a couple of weeks and give you how others feel on this kind of questionnaire, and I'll tell you what we're going to do with it as well. Number 9, I worry too much over something that really doesn't matter. You're starting to get a sense of where these questions are getting at, but we'll talk some about it here. All right, number 10, I am happy. Number 11, I have disturbing thoughts. Generally. No. You can see some do. Hopefully you're all answering honestly, which I'm assuming you are. That was good. I lack self-confidence. Come on, one more. Oh, good job. Number 13. Ready? I feel secure. All right, you can see numbers there. Number 14, I make decisions easily. We'll see who clicks in very quickly or not. Those that click in toward the very end. Come on, people, get to 130. Oh, geez, that was good. Oh, sorry, did you get to see the numbers? I'm sorry, that was too fast. Okay, we'll work on that one. I made a quick decision. I feel inadequate. And the results are, okay, sometimes is a common answer. Number 16, oops, sorry, that was restarting. 16, I am content. There are the numbers. Pretty good. 17, by the way, there are 20 questions. Some unimportant thoughts or thought runs through my mind and bothers me. Some unimportant thought. All right. There we go. You see numbers of where you stand and how everybody else has voted. Number 18, I take disappointment so keenly that I can't put them out of my mind. This gives us a good gauge of some events, and you're probably starting to figure out what they are. You can see where people are voting and where they're landing. Number 19, I am a steady person. And then the last question. Okay, numbers are fairly consistent almost on all of these questions. I get in a state of tension or turmoil as I think over my recent concerns and interests. All right. I think that's the last one. Let me just make sure. I hear you putting your clickers away. Let's see if it is. I think it is. Come on, 130, you could do it. Come on, 2 more. Do it. We did it. Okay. Thank you for playing along on this. And here's the idea. What's happening is this is, you might imagine, and I'll give you some more details as we go along throughout the semester, because we're going to talk about, what do you think the topic was that this questionnaire was looking at? It's looking at, views related to a variety of things. One is, of course, the area of anxiety. And what the researcher was trying to do, this is a national survey, it starts to point out some things, and here's how we look at it. Ready? We're trying to find out, are there certain ways in which, in this particular study, it's the idea of mood, emotions, feelings of anxiety, feelings of calmness. Do they change and vary over time? Neurotransmitters, to tie it back in, do this. Neurotransmitters, for the most part, are involved, and we can find them firing at different times. Did we end with serotonin? Is that right? Right here. The idea of, for example, the impact that certain drugs have upon neurotransmitters. Okay? And so just as a reminder, what we've been covering is all of these different types. There are probably over 50, 60 neurotransmitters identified in the brain. Some we know a lot more about than others. I've spoken about acetylcholine, dopamine, endorphin, serotonin, norepinephrine. These are the kinds of things that occur when researchers are able to start identifying particular drugs and their impact. When we have, for example, someone suffering from manic depression. You heard of this before, bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is oftentimes the result of things that are very complex. It could be a combination of genetics, it could be a possible brain injury or trauma that we're unaware of. It could be just something that's occurring out there that we still have yet to discover, but it is correlated with the idea of norepinephrine. And the reason is we know that if we give some medications that influence norepinephrine, like let's say lithium, it changes people that are going on these highs of mania and these lows of depression, and it brings them closer. So these drugs start to regulate these highs and these lows, and we know it's having an impact on neurotransmitters. But we're not sophisticated enough with the research out there to figure out specifically what is it doing. We know it's influencing this, just like we know, for example, antidepressants. We know that antidepressants work by blocking the reuptake inhibitors, right? The vacuum cleaners that we talked about that suck up these neurotransmitters, like serotonin reuptake inhibitors, what we call selective. They're SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. What that means is, for somebody that's feeling slightly depressed, something is going on with serotonin that isn't properly getting enough through your brain, and antidepressants allow more serotonin to stay in the brain and working, and in our analogy, it blocks something like Prozac, for example, will block the vacuum cleaner, the reuptake mechanism, and so serotonin keeps sending its message that says, I feel good, all right? and it begins to relieve the symptoms of depression. So, yeah, go ahead, question.
How does that not become addictive if it works similarly to cocaine?
All right. The question is, how does something like, let's say, an antidepressant not become addictive, right? Well, usually there are different ways in which medications, drugs that we take do become addictive. And that is, you begin to develop tolerance, right? You take something, you need a little bit more the next time. If you take maybe one drink of alcohol, or let's say even one serving of alcohol, it might, if you haven't drunk much before, it'll kind of start to cause you to feel the effects. A couple of weeks later, after taking, let's say, a serving of alcohol every day, it'll take you a little bit more. Well, that's tolerance. And what eventually happens is you begin to develop the need to have a little bit more in order to feel the same effects. And then sometimes the brain responds by becoming addicted, right? Meaning, in order to get a feeling or to get back to what feels normal, you have all now begun to need to have a little bit more. All right? So we call an addiction somebody that has this kind of almost withdrawal effects. You take cocaine. Your brain begins to shut down your normal dopamine making. So you take away the cocaine, and now your brain responded by that excess cocaine by saying, stop making so much dopamine. You have too much in your brain. The brain stops making it. You take the cocaine away, and now you don't even have as much in there. And that's the beginnings, right, of what we call an addiction. You need more just to feel even normal levels of pleasure. The reason things like Prozac and antidepressants are less addicting is because they're controlled. They're monitored. They don't get to the point where you're taking too much, where your brain responds this way. For the majority of what we call antidepressants or antipsychotics, they don't become addictive because the numbers and the quantities are regulated fairly good by most doctors that give them to you, and you don't run into the problem of an unregulated drug out there that people are taking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so basically it's making up for a lack of.
It's making up for a lack of, and it doesn't trigger the other things that can occur with unregulated drug use in that you're taking too much and you're getting too much out of this. Does that make sense? So that your brain isn't responding by having so much, it's responding to not having enough. And it brings it back in. All right? Now it's a very complex question, by the way, but that's a general, fairly simplistic answer. But that's why most of the time you don't get addicted to these prescribed medications. Now you can if you start abusing them. How many have heard of somebody that's become addicted to a prescribed medication like Vicodin or something else? If you know of people that have struggled with this, well, oftentimes that can happen. It's more rare because, again, you have people there watching and monitoring these things, but it can, especially if people take too much or get extra from others. Okay, real quickly, GABA. GABA is a neurotransmitter that we oftentimes will say is very similar to a tranquilizer. It helps. It's what we call an anti-anxiety neurotransmitter, and what it does is it allows the brain to stop in its excitatory phase by calming. When two nerve cells are communicating, many of these neurotransmitters say this: send the message, send the message. We call that excitatory. Okay? If you were to take and add cocaine into your system, your brain would go like this. It would find that pathway. Eventually, it would trigger this pathway into the pleasure center, and dopamine would continue to exist out here in the synaptic gap. That neurotransmitter now called dopamine would continue to stimulate the next nerve cell saying, send the message, it's excitatory, and your brain would respond by having this pathway more active, and you would go like this. Feels good, feels good, feels good, I like it. That's called an excitatory message. It keeps sending it. When you're ready? If you answered on some of the questions in the poll today that you are anxious, how many have a symptom sometimes where you're anxious, where you feel like your thoughts are running? You can't stop them. Maybe there's like, I can't turn off. You wake up at night thinking about it. You wake up early. You can't fall asleep. Right? What GABA does is just the opposite. GABA is a type of neurotransmitter that doesn't say send the message. Instead, GABA tells the next nerve cell to what? It says, don't send the message. Don't send it. Don't send it. Don't send it. It's what we call an inhibitory. An inhibitory goes like this. All of these messages are going, send the message, and GABA is like brakes, and GABA comes over here and attaches to this neurotransmitter, to this nerve cell, and it says, don't send it, don't send it, don't send it. Do you see why that would be important in our brains to have brakes? And so if you go to a doctor, if you went today and you told him, I'm suffering from anxiety, I can't keep my thoughts from stopping. I worry about this and I worry about that, and it's just constantly going on and on. I guarantee you many are going to walk away with an anti-anxiety prescription that is probably some type of inhibitory, probably related to GABA, which is in a sense of helping you because it will help your thoughts to stop cascading, because GABA functions by saying, slow down, stop. Don't fire, don't fire, don't fire. And a person will, with the right amount of this, begin to go, okay, my thoughts are slowing down. I can be in control of this. And they begin to show that they feel less anxious. Okay? Now, that's what tranquilizers work. That's what some poisons work. I had a student in my class who came out of a missionary family, and they lived in this one of these jungles down with this tribe of people who use curare. Your book talks a little bit about this poison. They will dip this poison curare on an arrow, shoot an animal, let's say like a monkey, and it's just like GABA. You tell me what will happen to this monkey when it gets shot with this arrow dipped in curare, a poison, which mimics GABA. It hits them, and this monkey's running around. What might be the first effect if all of a sudden they're moving and running around and now they get hit by this poison, that's GABA? What will they probably show symptoms of? Maybe what would happen, let's say, to their heart rate? Or their muscle tension, or they would start to slow down. And you see these monkeys and all of a sudden hit by curare, slowing down, their heart rate starts to slow down, and eventually their muscles stop working. Because a lot of the neurotransmitters, like acetylcholine, that are moving you, it stops them and they fall out of the tree because they're not moving, but they're still somewhat awake. Okay? It shuts them down just like a tranquilizer would, and that's not uncommon to what happens if you were to go in and go under surgery. You'd be given some sort of thing just like this. It would start to slow the system down. All right? It's called an inhibitory. There are more inhibitories out there, but they work just the opposite versus an excitatory. Some drugs, some medications that you take are what we call antagonistic. If you have someone who's your antagonistic, do they work for you or against you? They work against you. Your antagonist is somebody who's working against you. So if you take a medication that works against your internal states, it works against it. Ready? What's one of the most deadliest poisons that we know for humans? It's not that far off from finding it happen. Well, I'll give you one of them. One of the most deadliest is something called strychnine. Strychnine is an antagonist that's related to probably to a variety of things, but mostly acetylcholine. Ready? When you breathe or move, your muscles, you are using acetylcholine primarily as this neurotransmitter. Strychnine, guess what it does? It disables, it's an antagonist against all acetylcholine, for example. So if you took strychnine, what would happen is you would begin to have, even better, ready? Strychnine also works against all the inhibitors like GABA, okay? That's another thing strychnine does. It disables, it works against your inhibitors like GABA. So now somebody that's been injected with strychnine will begin to show this amazing, quick body system that is now taking off and running strong, and your heart rate will go wild, and that will result, oftentimes if given enough, into some bad things that are occurring with the body, and death can occur simply because the body's too taxed. All right. So inhibitors, agonists, by the way, would be just the opposite of antagonists, right? something that's an agonist, works for you. Tobacco works just like acetylcholine, for example. So your brain goes like this. For tobacco, your brain says, yep, it feels nicotine is just like acetylcholine. It's an agonist. It helps it along. It makes it better. Do you remember all of these different channels that we talked about in here that are now at the receiving neurotransmitter? How many remember that? The channels over here that get opened. Somebody's leg was right here. Remember that as the channel. Tobacco goes in, and it goes like this. Tobacco comes across, pretends to be almost like an agonist for acetylcholine, sets it up over here on this tumbler to the lock, and all of a sudden your brain goes, oh, open it up, let it go through. It works just like acetylcholine, and your brain, by the way, the reason you make strong addictions to nicotine is your brain immediately looks at this and says, ooh, make more of these gates. Make more of them, because you've got a lot of this out there. You don't have enough gates, so it starts to make more of the tumblers and more of the gates, and then you take nicotine away, and now you start to see why people have withdrawals like, oh, I want more of that, because they got a lot more gates. Does that make sense? It's an amazingly complex system that functions very well, but taking medications in and drugs do have huge impact at this neurochemical level. So, summarizing, agonists mimic or fool, right? They might mimic or fool the receptors. Antagonists block at the receptor site. They block, they work against. So when it comes to drug use, for example, here's a question we'll ask. The question will be, why do people still continue to do these? For example, why do people take drugs? And we'll watch this video clip trying to answer the question, why do people take drugs? I'll put this back up in just a second. Here's what's amazing. Did I describe this towards the first day of the semester where these animals will simply cross something that an animal that wants food or water will not cross because it hurts too much? But this animal simply has learned that it wants that brain stimulation so much, that pleasure so much, it's going to cross something that's very painful. Now, what it goes on to show us is that drug use, and in particular the idea of addictions, are very difficult to break because of just simply this brain gets conditioned to using these things and likes them, and people will make all kinds of sacrifices to get that pleasure. So that pleasure then, and that need for it becomes so overwhelming that they will almost give up and they won't really care. If any of you all know somebody that has an addiction, you know what this is like. You know that they will sacrifice marriages, families, relationships. They'll still lie. They'll do anything just to get at this. And so drug treatment centers have a very difficult time. You see, if you take somebody who has an addiction to a drug or a medication, like heroin or cocaine or crack cocaine, we can get them in there and you can clean them up and even get this kind of almost addiction kind of taken out of their brain, and even physiologically, where they don't need it. But then something else kicks in. A lot of these individuals now still have habits and associations, and they get back out and they relapse because now the brain has these other things. It grabs on or latches on to associations. Maybe they find people that they used to do drugs with, and it all of a sudden brings back these feelings that were gone or not there, that said, ooh, this is good. I remember we were here, and now the brain is back into this mode again, and it's highly difficult. That's why you see a lot of these people that are in these drug treatment centers not doing well because they're not giving it enough time to physiologically at the neurochemical level, but also they have to start working on their associations, which we'll talk about in this class when it comes to the impact of learning and memory on our behavior, and how associations, how they can be strong and difficult to break. Okay, are there questions about this? I want to show you a little bit about an excitatory nerve problem when it goes too fast. And this electricity becomes overwhelming in something called epilepsy and in seizures. But are there any questions about anything covered so far? Drug use? Yeah?
The difference between excitatory and
Real quickly, the difference in an excitatory versus an inhibitory is just what it sounds like. The excitatory tells the next nerve cell, send the message, right? It excites it to send it. An inhibitory says, don't send it, don't send it, don't send it. It inhibits it. That's it in a basic way. Humans will actually even physically put up with lots of pain just to get it as well. Rat models here, when it comes to drug use, amazingly, we find the model is fairly accurate, that humans will also, even if they had to run across something that would shock them, so to speak, that they will also do something very similar. So there's a lot of commonalities in these models. So that is the answer. And some of you that know somebody that has an addiction, you'll know that they'll put up with lots. Sometimes it's relational pain or other kinds of pain, but it's still there. Okay, let me show you somebody that's dealing with an area with seizures. Now, in most cases, when someone is experiencing seizures of a certain sort, medications, what do you think you would give them, an inhibitory or an excitatory if they have seizures? You'd give them an inhibitory, right? Would you more likely give them something like up here, let's say dopamine, or would you give them GABA? You'd give them GABA. You'd give them something that begins to calm it. And for many people that deal with seizures, inhibitories like GABA start to calm it. Because ready? A seizure is this overwhelming that starts in one part of the brain and amplifies as it goes across to the other. And it becomes almost overwhelming, and the brain, in a sense, has this over-electrical stimulation that's going on, out of control, and GABA, in a sense, will begin to calm it. All right? Now, in all cases, what we find is that there are times in which it doesn't work as well, medication for some people, and there are other techniques to having to deal with this. Here's one example of a girl in which they tried to find where the seizure was occurring and tried to cut out that part of her brain. Pretty cool, huh? It's cool to see. Again, it's a fairly radical process of going in and attacking this part. The radical process is that it's not always as successful, and there are times in which taking out part of that brain that may be damaged is not possible. But in this case, what happens is it works out well, and there's one other procedure I'm going to talk about when it comes to epilepsy that's a slightly more radical, or at least different looking, and I'll show you that video clip. All right. Questions on how that works? Or anything related to some of the diseases. We talked some about at the very beginning. I mentioned schizophrenia. You'll find an excess amount of dopamine in their brains. That dopamine kind of allows our thinking to be clear. It's involved in lots of things, but with schizophrenics, there's so much dopamine being made that it actually contributes to some of the symptoms of schizophrenia, like paranoia, thinking, unable to control their thoughts, irrational thinking, for example. And so you give them a dopamine blocker. And you remember what we said, if you give them too much, they show symptoms of, how many remember Parkinson's disease, where if you give somebody too much of a dopamine blocker, they start to show Parkinson's-like symptoms, because one of the things that Parkinson's sufferers have not enough of is dopamine. And so you get somebody with schizophrenia and they get the shakes, as we talked about before.
For Parkinson's patients, do they take dopamine?
Yeah, Parkinson's patients. Anybody know somebody that has Parkinson's? Anybody know a well-known celebrity that's Parkinson's? Who's one that you know? Michael J. Fox? Any others? Muhammad Ali? Others? each of them will be the problem, yeah, you give them dopamine and nothing happens because the brain doesn't convert it. So what you do is you give them something called L-DOPA, which is a derivative, and the brain turns that into dopamine, but it only has limited effects, so or small number of effects. Yeah. Well, here's for when it comes to this, like for example, taking certain medications or taking on anything that's related that has this, you'll find that it has, unfortunately, some side effects, and it doesn't work all of the time, and usually it lasts for a period of time to give some people an opportunity at kind of feeling more normal, but it also doesn't last forever. So Michael J. Fox, for example, no longer, dopamine doesn't have an effect on him. But good. Anything else? Questions? Yeah?
What happens in someone who has like cerebral palsy?
Yeah, there are a lot of disorders and diseases that have some of these neurotransmitter correlates that we can find specifically. And then there are some that are either more broad spread problems, and cerebral palsy would be one that has much more related to some brain damage that's broader than even at the neurotransmitter level. We'll talk a little bit about that actually a little bit later on, but those are usually more broad-based or bigger effects that have occurred due to some other things rather than, let's say, at a neurotransmitter level, though they are important. Yeah. Okay. When it comes to the brain, you don't have to write this down, but when we look at brains and people begin to study, do men and women have different brains? Well, actually, they're more similar than alike on average. And we don't find many major differences between, for example, men and women in their brains, how they think, function, act, but there are some distinct differences that have been uncovered. In general, you can think of them this way, and men's brains in general would be typically bigger. That doesn't mean necessarily smarter, just bigger in volume, all right? There seems to be, at least in some of the early studies, more gray matter and made up of what we call these more active neurons, while women's brains seem to be more faster and efficient. Again, as a general thing, there is some evidence that they're using this a little bit more efficiently than men, and interesting kind of finding that nerve cells may be packed more closely together in women's brains. Again, we're talking broad generalities here, but they probably also have more white matter, this part of the brain that's kind of responsible more for communication between especially different areas of the brain. So in general, there are more similarities. Women's brains are probably slightly more what we call complexly corrugated. They have more kind of bellies and what we call this corrugated look to them. And what it means and what it comes in to be is, while we might use different parts of the brain, even to maybe encode memories, to make some decisions, we might be using different parts to recognize faces and solve certain problems. And these are kind of newer findings out there. More keep getting added. Some keep getting refined. You don't have to know all of this or write it down. It's just more something I thought you might find interesting. Okay? Questions? I'm going to move now to the last part, which is looking at the brain from more of a macro level, and then I want to show you what we do in some surgery called split brain surgery. So are there any questions about anything covered so far? All right. Real quickly then, the way the brain is organized. I'm going to give you just simply three main areas. The brain stem, which is responsible for all these automatic, what we call survival functions. If you have brainstem trauma, something is damaged in the brainstem, you most likely would not survive it, because these functions that are responsible just for breathing, for example, or just for controlling all the other things in your body, usually are found in the brainstem. Okay? So we sometimes will refer to this these different, let's say, organizations, as the brainstem would be one. The next level up would be the limbic system. Okay? The limbic system would be that which we're talking when it comes to like emotional states, processing of things like fear, regulating our drives. And so if you have damage to this part of the brain called the limbic system, you might find somebody unable, for example, to control fear or rage, for example. Guy climbed on top of a tower at the University of Texas before most of you were born, took a couple of rifles with him, had complained for weeks about feeling mad and angry. Climbed this tower, middle of Texas. Friend of mine, good friend, her dad was standing there walking out of one of the buildings. And he walks out and someone says, "Stop, don't go out there." And he thought he heard firecrackers. This thing's exploding like pop, pop, pop. And someone said, "Don't go out there." And so he kind of stepped back in. And unknowingly, what was happening on that campus was guys standing up in this tower shooting people, ended up killing 38 people that day. 38 people. Probably good now, I'm not even sure. It was maybe 25 years ago. Well, he had been complaining about something. What they did when they did an autopsy on this individual was they found that there was a growth that was pushing in on his limbic system, that part of our brains that controls us. And he kept saying, "I just can't control this rage and this anger." Well, what was occurring may have been due, or some of this may have been due to this pressure that was being put on this emotional state of his brain that he just was, it was just kind of almost growing and exploding in him. And unfortunately, he chose to react and respond this way. He was killed by somebody storming up this, eventually getting up there, a police officer shot him. But again, not until he had done some major damage to not only this campus, but to, the whole area was very traumatic for people. But the limbic system, things like the amygdala and other things that are involved in this, in controlling that, is another part. And then, of course, you have, at a more macro level, what we call the cerebral cortex. This is that area of the brain that distinguishes us from lower organisms. It's the part that contains our processing, where we receive and process information, make decisions, voluntarily act in a certain way. That's the cerebral cortex. It's the part that is really important when we're dealing with making, like, let's say, a decision and we're thinking through options. It's kind of what we call the high road, that part of consciousness where we're aware, usually thinking, talking about things. Processing, dealing with emotion is occurring sometimes at this lower road, maybe through the limbic system. We're not oftentimes even aware of it. So, as far as the brain, this is all you need to do for this particular class. I don't expect you to memorize the anatomy of the brain other than this. Does that sound good? I'm not expecting you to go into chapter 2 and memorize the anatomy of the brain. So that should be good news. This is about as much as you need. Does that make sense? The only other thing is we're going to look real quickly at the geography of the brain. Any questions about this, though? I'm going to show you again severing the two halves of the brain when we deal with epilepsy. Here's where we're heading next. All right, lastly, geographical divisions then. What's this? They found some cool things like this. See right there? This may very well be an American because of the brain thing. Not really. This is somebody in love. You can see there a little bit of what we find. Okay, really what I'm talking about, not geography and not being in love, but instead the idea when we break the brain up into different parts, we look at things like lobes, right? How many heard of the frontal lobe before? All right, good. Is that part where you find? Where? Right up in the front. Frontal lobe, probably very important in a number of ways. We'll talk about this in developmental and how the frontal lobe is still even being wired in the prefrontal cortex area, even up through your teen years, and what implications that has. We'll talk a little bit about that in a couple weeks. You can see up here the parietal lobe, which is kind of more towards the top and the back. The occipital lobe, where vision is processed. And then right here, what are these called? These are called your temples. It's because that's where you'll find your temporal lobes. Okay? All right, that's about as much detail that you need to know when it comes to the brain. Other questions or anything? All right, let me show you then what happens when we divide it, and I'll put this back up in just a second. In major cases of epilepsy, there are times in which separating this is required. And let me just show you this video. By the way, here's what will happen. In between your left and right hemispheres, there's this thing called the corpus callosum. When you have, like Ashley's brain, you had a little bad piece over here. And it would begin to start firing, and these nerve cells would start to send off messages that would be out of control. But what would happen is, the reason she would have a seizure is as soon as it hit the middle part of her brain right here, right down the middle, it would get amplified, and these electrical messages would be sent much stronger because of that. And so someone decided, what happens if we cut the brain right here, that corpus callosum, those nerve fibers that connect the left and the right hemisphere, we might stop this amplification and these seizures. And guess what happened? It worked. Seizures in situations in which medications didn't stop the seizure, or they couldn't take out a part of the brain, when they severed this corpus callosum and divided it in half, they found some help. And here's one example of a person who took it and had the surgery. Oh, let's try it again. And then there were some interesting things that also happened to this person related to the processing. If you can see up on the screen, left hemisphere, right over here is where you will, on the left side of our brains, right here, speech and writing are primarily found. So if you were to say, what am I holding up right now? And if you say, he's holding up a battery, well, information is going to go into both your left and right visual fields. You'll see it both sides here, and speech is primarily here. But when I sever your corpus callosum right here, and then I put something only into your left visual field, which means it goes only over here to your right brain. If that was the case, if I can get this only into one half of your brain, right? The left visual, putting into your left visual field so it goes into your right brain, you would not be able to necessarily tell me what you see. You could describe it, but you may not be able to say battery. And so watch what happens in this video. Here's what I want you to do. Look at that in the textbook, see if you have questions, and I'll cover for the last minute or two, or the first minute or two on Wednesday, what happened, and then we'll move to developmental. All right.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.